you to the four students who are here tonight to take part in our discussion. First is, from Egypt, Mohammed Rifat El-Far. Rifat was the first one who asked me whether the girls among the forum delegates were chosen for their beauty as well as for their brains. He's got a great advantage over the non-Muslims in the group when the group is together as a whole because, as he explains to everybody, his religion permits him to have 4 wives. Gudrun Erlendsdottir from Iceland. When we went to see the president the day before yesterday, the president was very concerned lest he give his cold to some of the students. As you know, he had a very bad one. And Gudrun said, what did you say, Gudrun?
I thought it was an honor to get a presidential cold.
She's a little hoarse tonight. Next is Gur Ben-Ari from Israel. Gur Ben-Ari says that for the 4 days in Washington, he doesn't think he got any sleep at all. What were you doing all that sleepless time? What was the main thing, Gur?
Well, the climax of our stay in Washington, of course, it was the meeting with the president. And I appreciate him before as a general and as a president. And now I appreciate him as a personality. Because really, I felt as if I knew him for years ago. And really, now I can understand why they call him Ike.
And last, Per Friis Rusten from Norway. Per was real busy in Washington, too, but he says he was too busy to get to the Capitol or to see the Washington Monument or the National Museum. However, he was spending a lot of his time seeing one of the big high schools in Washington that has just been integrated, McKinley High School, and also seeing Senate hearings, watching them. Well, now, on this point of coexistence, of course, we Americans see the problem as a conflict between two completely different political and economic systems. Democratic capitalism on the one hand, on the other side, imperialistic Soviet communism. The 4 students who are here tonight come from countries that are neither democratic capitalist nor communist. So perhaps it might be a good idea to get started on this question of coexistence if we could find out a little bit more from each one about their countries who are in between. Is that all right with you? How do we start?
Well, I'd like to say a couple of words first.
All right.
Say, Rifat, I've been thinking of Egypt. I wanted to, how come that Egypt didn't turn communist? Because I know that about 30 years ago, you had a very low standard of living in Egypt. You had illiteracy. But after the present time, you have very quickly improved your standard of living and also done away with quite a lot of your illiteracy. Could you try to explain that briefly, the reason why?
You see, Per, since 3 years we are controlled by government. That's a very strong government, yes, and since this day is trying and making its best to give all the Egyptians everything they need. For example, as you know, that most of the Egyptians were farmers. So now the poorest farmer in Egypt, as a result of the land reform, has 3 acres. And they made many things. You should know that most of the Egyptians, or 80% of the Egyptians, couldn't write or read. But now, in the last year only, we established about 400 schools. And to let the women be very happy that the more things that they are struggling for it since many years is to vote. And in Egypt, they are going to vote the next year or the year before, the year after, as a result of this good government.
But, Per, could you tell me how it is that your country has not become communist? You have a socialist government and...
Well, we've got a socialistic government, I admit that. It's even a very strong socialistic government, in my opinion. I could try to explain a policy of the government very briefly what concerns economics and see the good and the bad sides of it. We've had a socialistic government since 1932, I think, only interrupted by the war. It has tried to enforce a lot of economic restrictions, and generally spoken, one could say that some of them has been to the benefit of the people, others not. They have, for instance, taken over many of the big businesses. But when a government takes over the big businesses, it takes in many people in order to prevent unemployment. But when you have too many people concerned in a business which actually don't do too much work, obviously they won't pay. Another thing is that they have given us many pensions We have, for instance, health insurance, which certainly has been to the benefit of the people, while our foreign policy, what concerns economics, isn't so good at the present time.
How pure a socialism do you consider Norway, Per?
How pure?
How pure? Is it a pure form of socialism?
Yes, I think so.
Then, Gur, maybe you should tell us about your collectivism in Israel, at least in the kibbutz. How's it working?
Yeah, first of all, I want to... What's the kibbutzim? Maybe I'll call it a small settlement, a democratic small settlement. Democratic because...
Let's spell the word. Kibbutzim, is the kibbutzim the plural?
The plural of
but
kibbutz.
But you say you live in a kibbutz.
You live in the kibbutz.
And each
kibbutz is the name of the settlement.
Is a collective settlement.
Each kibbutz is collective settlement. Then we have some other sorts of settlements.
But tell us about the
kibbutzim. All right. I just told you before that it's a democracy, because really I think that only, at any rate, in the kibbutzim, you'll be able to find the real democracy, the real... Because every member of the kibbutzim, while he is it doesn't different what position he is in the kibbutzim. He might be the truck driver, the teacher, or the room cleaner. He has the same rights and the same duties as the other one. And really, in the kibbutzim, every big decision and as well as a small decision can be passed only if the majority of the members of the kibbutzim agree, and they. For example, in the kibbutzim, they don't work for their own benefit, for their own individual benefit. They work for the kibbutz as a group. They work for the kibbutz, and they share the profits by the kibbutz.
They can't earn money themselves and keep it then. It's completely different from ours.
You see, but they don't need it. They get everything they want from the kibbutz. They get housing, furniture, of course, food and clothing. And if they really want to go and tell themselves in the big cities, they can get money from the kibbutz.
Let's return back 6 minutes. Oh, Gudrun, you said that there's no neighbors near you that cause you some troubles. And why you were fighting with Eric, the boy from Denmark?
That's another problem. But, of course, though Iceland is a small country and you find it very small and unimportant, we have our own problems to fight. For instance, the Danish people. Iceland was under the Danish people for 4 centuries, and as you perhaps know, Iceland is mostly known for its literature, for the old sagas and for the old poetry. And in fact, we love that poetry, and every person in Iceland knows them by heart.
The sagas,
yes, the old sagas. It's the first books that the children read, and how poor the farmer is. He has at least 10 of the old sagas, and he knows them by heart. And in old days, in 12th century, they ate their shoes rather than to give those manuscripts away.
And what was your problem with Eric? I didn't get in on this problem of coexistence.
Wait a minute. Yes, in the 17th century, an Icelandic professor at the University of Copenhagen, he collected those manuscripts and he got quite a lot of them. When he died, he gave them to the University of Copenhagen, British people. And now the manuscripts are kept in Copenhagen, and we want them back, because now we are building our own university, and we want our own library, and we want them back, but the Danish people don't want to give them back.
Well, maybe when Eric's heard your argument, he'll do something to influence them. I wish there were no more serious problems of coexistence than that.
Just one thing I want to tell you. You said that as your country is very small, is not important. I don't think so, because my country, Israel, is also very small, at least to me. It's a very important country.
So talking about the Middle East, seems that many of us have some difficulties in coexist with somebody else. Since we have a boy from Egypt and a boy from Israel here, I'd like to ask you some maybe touchy questions about the problems down in the Middle East. Could you, Gur, try to explain briefly and get the main points about what happened in Israel in 1947?
I'm glad you started from this year, 1947, because really, for the Jewish nation in 1947 occurred one of the biggest events. The United Nations decided that it would be a free Jewish nation in the country which was then under the British mandate, which was called then Palestine. It's really funny because in this case, it's one of the fewest cases which both the big blocs in the UN, both America, United States, and Russia agreed together and decided to create a new state in the Middle East, Israel. You know that before this decision passed in the United Nations, this country, Palestine, was settled by both Arabs and Jews. And according to this decision, we had to have two countries, the Israeli country, its own government, new country, and the Arabian Palestinian country. It's a new country by its own government. But in the Middle East, we have another Arab countries, and these Arab countries didn't want to agree with this UN resolution, and declaring, and not only declaring, and not only threatening, but really getting it into fact. And they threatened the UN, and the Secretary of the Arab League, Azam Pecha, declared that they would create a massacre in which the comparison, the Crusades massacre, would be such as a game, as a play. And they really invaded the boundaries of Israel. And just to show you and to prove you that what I say is not only my point of view, I brought something. And this is, as you see, it's the United Nations Palestine Commission. And I should like, if you let me, to just quote a very short sentence from here. This was reported to the United Nations by a commission sent to Israel and to this region to investigate what really happened there. And this commission reported to the UN. As the commission reported to the Security Council in its first special report on 16 February 1948, powerful Arab interests, both inside and outside Palestine, are defying the resolution of the General Assembly and are engaged in a deliberate effort to alter by force the settlement investigate therein. Armed Arab bands from neighboring Arab states have infiltrated into the territory of Palestine and together with local Arab forces are defeating the purpose of the resolution by acts of violence. And from this real event happened all the other problems and troubles. We had...
Did you bring a library with you, Rifat?
No, I
No,
didn't have the chance to do that.
Yeah, I'm very sorry. It isn't a library, just a proof that I wasn't sure that they would believe me, so just to prove. And you see, we had the war really because at the beginning it was only war created by the local Arab citizens of Palestine. And then on the 5th of May 1948, seven Arab countries, regular armies invaded to Israel.
Well, now look, let's give Rifat a chance.
All right.
Because sorry.
May I, if you should sum up what you said, would it be correct to say that you got recognized, your country, Israel, got recognized by the UN, but the Arab countries have difficulties in recognizing Israel? Is that right?
It's not also right that I would tell you something else, that the Arab countries, by their problem, for the first time, they created members of the UN rejected the UN resolutions by military force and raised arms against UN resolutions.
Okay, well, Rifat, you need a fair chance to tell your opinion about that point.
First of all, I would like to tell Gur that the Arab countries didn't begin to attack Israel, the country which was recognized by the United Nations, before it began to do its unpeaceful policy against the people of Palestine. And that's what I wanted to remark about his speech and about his library. I'm sorry I couldn't bring one like this, but I hope the next time I'll have the chance. But you may ask me about the problem in my point of view. As I can see this problem, I never can find this now. This is a political problem or something like this. Now I can see this a social problem. A problem that is very important for everyone lives in the world. The problem of more than 1 million people living in the desert, and that's because they are kicked out of their country and their homes and their land now are for people from all over the world. That's not their country. So
Rifat,
it's
you're
so funny.
speaking of the problem of the refugees.
Yes, about this problem of Palestine, because I'm not speaking about
But the refugees
beginning.
that left Palestine and are now...
But excuse me, couldn't we first get clear how, what happened before those refugees or the citizens of Palestine were thrown out of their country. Who did it? That is the problem, really, because before we start to discuss who has the responsibility for those refugees, the Israeli claim that it was caused by the Arabs, and the Arabs claim it was caused by the Israeli. Gur, could you try to explain your opinion about refugees? Who has the responsibility for it?
I told you that the Arab.
Do you want to finish? Wait,
excuse me, you could
go ahead and
finish,
finish, Rifat.
Let's speak again about the problem at the beginning, if you like to hear it. See, the United Nations ordered this country, or recognized that must be a country named Israel in this place. And it limited the area of this country. And after this, they were not satisfied with this area and began to collect the other lands for them. And of course, we must protect, the Arab must protect their land. It mustn't be taken from them, and after this they must bow to them. I don't think that's possible. So they tried to help this Arab by their armies, but for some special reasons it's not necessary to say it to you or state it to you. That's because there's the reasons from outside the countries, and some of them from the countries, got them to lose the war, and it happened. And then this area, which Israel was allowed to take by the permission from the United Nations, it was increased. So many people were living in these parts, so are the refugees. And 43% of these refugees are in the Arab country, and the others are living under the control of the Egyptians. It's the Egyptian government, but how can we feed them all?
Excuse me, do you mean to say that the refugees which live in outside Palestine now actually were thrown out by the Jewish population of Israel? Is that what you try to say?
Yes, by the government.
I think I should fairly interpret what Rifat was saying, that the Israelis, you were saying, went farther than the boundaries that the UN told them to stay within, and that many of the refugees come from that area. Is that what you were trying to say?
Yes.
Yeah, I wanted to make it clear that your point got across.
Can I please now express my point of view? I understand that there are two problems here, the boundaries and the refugees, and I try to answer to both of them. First of all, as I proved to you, the aggression in the Middle East was caused by the Arab countries. And really, you can't, you know, that reminds me something, that a boy murdered two of his two parents, and while coming to court, he asked pity because he's an orphan. That's what happened in the Middle East. The Arab countries invaded Israel in order to destroy it, to throw the Jews into the sea. And if they had succeeded in this wish that they wanted to do, they wouldn't have fished us from the sea and bring us back to the boundaries which the UN ordered. It's unfortunately for them and fortunately for us that we succeeded in defeating them. And you could now, after you gained something by blood and you paid for it very expensive, we had to sacrifice our flowers of the youth in this war. Now we can't come back. And there's something else. You know that in
Just a second, Gur. I want to get a map up here so that we're absolutely sure what we're talking about. I'll have to hide the four of you for just a minute so I can get this in the camera. Here's the Mediterranean Sea, of course. The Egyptian border comes up to here. The borders now, I think this map is almost up to date. It doesn't quite have Gaza, but I'm outlining with a pencil now the borders of Israel, and then it goes up around here. Jerusalem is here, which is right on the boundary between the two countries, and this is the big area, the Negev, where many of your kibbutzim, I believe, are developing the country now. This then is the boundary, more or less, if the map is pretty much up to date, of Israel.
Yeah. So I want to continue. So in 1948 we signed armistice pacts with the Arab countries, and these armistice pacts were signed in the supervision of UN observers and according to these international boundaries of Israel. So these are the international boundaries of Israel. And now something else I want to mention, that I think what's the use of the UN if a country, a member of the UN, does something against the UN and things like this. All right, now the UN decided something which doesn't fit, doesn't go together with our self-interest. We'll try to raise army against this, to reject this resolution. And then, if we succeed, it's all right, we'll keep it. And if not, we'll go back to the situation which was at the beginning, and we'll ask our rights. And now about the Arab refugees problem.
Excuse me, before you go on to that,
Yeah.
I would like to pose you a question. You said in the beginning that you base your statehood on the recognition of the United Nations. Is that right? You base your statehood on the recognition of the United Nations.
Not recognition, but the solution of the United Nations and the resolution of the United Nations of creation a new
Okay.
Israeli state in the Middle East.
All right, but at the same time,
Yeah.
you have violated a border set by the United Nations. You have invaded a territory which you are not allowed to do according to the United Nations. I don't see your point of view there. I don't see how you could have both, have it both ways.
I'll explain you. You see, Israel was invaded, and Israel didn't invade. In the process of pushing back the invading Arab armies, we really increased our area.
Are
And that's
you,
a-
excuse me, are you agreeing with Per on this?
No, I don't agree with the rule of this discussion because it's not fair from you, Per, because you didn't give me the chance to speak to you.
Excuse me.
If Israel, this country, which wanted to respect the United Nations and carry out its orders, at least as they carried out its order in forming their country, they must carry out its order in doing the other things. And it's not too far for us to know that there's not more, but 2 years from the beginning nearly, the United Nations order are 3 orders. These 3 orders, at least they must be respected by the country which is formed to respect the United Nations. These 3 are the refugees. These people must return to their countries, their homeland, as they were before. It is not fair to bring people from all over the world to let them stay in the homes of the people. This is the first, and the second was the borders. The borders between us, as now there's Israel in this place, which is Palestine. So they must stay in their borders. They must don't come out of their borders to kill people. And we don't forget that since not too much, Kibya was destroyed for nothing, to kill people, to kill women, to kill children. And that's why regular army killing children and women. That's so funny, so funny. And third one, let me complete. The third one was Jerusalem. This city, this sacred city for all the people, for the Jewish, for the Christians, for the Muslims. It must be international.
I think you didn't quite understand Per. As I understood it, he was arguing on your side, Rifat. He was saying that if Israel was born through a UN resolution, wasn't that what you were saying? Then it ought to respect the UN resolution.
Yes,
he was arguing on your side. of
What
that
I
point.
said is to make his words more clearer, but I know that he was
Mrs.
speaking
Waterman.
the right.
Well, now, just a minute, Gore. We haven't got very much longer. We've been talking now about what's happened in the past. I think everybody would be awfully interested. Or do you want to ask a question
I want
first?
to ask about the attitude of the young people in your countries now. Do you
Lady,
believe in peaceful settlement of that?
you have many
Mother?
difficult questions.
Try to answer.
Yeah. You see, in my country, you can find between the youth 2 boys. One of them who can forget what happened from these people which occupied Palestine and what's happening and what's going to happen, as they can show us. And this wants war. This wants to defend the country. And the other one who tried to forget what happened and what's going to happen and what's happening now. And this like to peace or something like this. And I think that the first kind are more than the second. That's because these people didn't give this youth the chance to find that these people who live in Israel want peace, as they say, and want coexist, as they say.
Now let's hear from Gore. What about your young people in 1 minute?
And I must tell you about my young people, but you didn't let me the chance to answer about the other 2 questions, about the refugee question, about the internationalization of Jerusalem.
Well, but look
now,
ahead
all
to the
right,
future.
go
We've
ask.
only got a minute.
All right. Just what I wanted to say, that we look in the Middle East of coexistence, and coexistence can be achieved only by cooperation, and cooperation can be achieved only by peace. This is the main wish of Israel, and the willingness of Israel is to peace. And I must say that the youth of Israel agrees with 100% with our government, which extended its hand to, and which declared many, many times, and which are still declaring from every national and international stage its willingness to at least to sit together and to conclude peace with each of the Arab countries or all of them together. And this is my point.
Good. Now you've each got a chance for a quick final statement, if you will. I'm sorry the time's gone so quickly.
The last thing I like to say, that to tell all the Americans, or to let them know, as I know, that the Egyptian new foreign policy is a peaceful foreign policy.
You got a final word?
And I still think that the hardest task of coexistence is understanding the neighbor's point of view.
I have nothing to add what I said before, just that I hope that Rifat really meant what he said and that we'll have peace in the area.
We should say that when we've discussed coexistence in the Middle East, we could say that is a question of principle. But the main thing it will happen if we try to discuss coexistence in general, the big problems about coexistence. If I should say it in one word, that must be that we must try to get more international minded. We mustn't only think in national terms.
Thank you, Per. You've been listening to students from Egypt, Rifat El-Far, Gudrun Erlendsdatter from Iceland, Gur Ben-Ari from Israel, and Per Friis Rusten from Norway. Next week, our discussion will be what is the proper purpose of a high school education, and these students are spending day after day in high schools. If there's one thing about the United States that they know more about than any other, it's our high schools compared to their own.